By every law of physics, they said that ship was impossible, until they saw the Terran flag. The scout ship Whisper Current drifted at the edge of the Kestrel Reach, a quiet stretch of space where 3 star systems met, and almost nothing ever happened. Sub-Commander Yasa Vel liked it that way. Quiet postings meant no reports to write, no mistakes to explain, and no reason for the Convergence Council to ever say her name in a meeting. Yasa was Doran, a species that stood a little taller than humans, with gray-blue skin and eyes that could see heat the way humans saw light. She had served the Convergence for 11 cycles, and in that time she had learned one thing above all else. The universe followed rules. Ships needed fuel. Engines needed time to charge. Hulls could only take so much stress before they cracked. These were not opinions. They were laws, tested 1,000 times by 1,000 species, going back farther than her homeworld's written history. So when her censor officer, a small nervous Bellic named Toru, called her to the bridge at the start of 3rd shift, she was not expecting her laws to break. "Sub-Commander, you need to see this," Toru said. His 4 eyes were wide, which for a Bellic meant real fear, not the polite fear he usually showed her. "See what? A pirate raider? A comet?" "A ship, ma'am. It just arrived." Yasa walked to the sensor display and looked at the readout, and for a moment she thought the system was broken. The unknown ship had entered the system at a velocity that should have torn it apart. There was no gradual burn, no long deceleration curve. One moment the space was empty. The next moment, according to the sensors, an object roughly 400 meters long was moving through the outer belt at a speed that made her stomach twist just reading the number. "Recalibrate the array," she said. "That reading is wrong." "I already did, ma'am. Twice." She stared at the number again. No engine the Convergence had ever built could survive that kind of acceleration, let alone a crew inside it. The stresses alone should have crushed anything living into paste. And yet the ship was still broadcasting a faint engine signature, still moving, still very much intact. "Shields up," Yasa said quietly. "Bring us to alert status. I want a full scan the moment we're in range, and I want it quiet. No hailing yet. I want to know what we're looking at before we say hello to it." The Whisper Current was a small ship, built for watching and reporting, not for fighting. It carried light shields and 2 defense turrets, nothing more. Against most things in this part of space, that was enough. Yasa did not yet know if it would be enough for this. As they closed the distance, more details came through. The stranger's hull was a dull gray color, streaked with black, scoring in some places, like it had passed through fire or weapons fire more than once, and simply kept going. There were no smooth curves like Convergence ships favored. This vessel looked blunt and heavy, built more like a tool than a work of art. Along one side, near the front, there was a marking, a shape. Yasa zoomed the image as far as the scanners allowed, but at this distance it was still too blurred to make out clearly. "Energy signature?" she asked. "Strange, ma'am," Toru said. "It doesn't match anything in the database. It's not fusion, not antimatter, not anything we've cataloged. The engine core is putting out far more power than a ship that size should need, and it's leaking badly. By every safety standard we use, that ship should have gone critical hours ago. Then why hasn't it?" Toru had no answer for that. They were still 4 minutes from effective sensor range when the second anomaly happened. A pair of unregistered ships, small and fast, came out of the asteroid field on an intercept course with the stranger. Yasa recognized the ship class instantly. Voss pattern raiders, the kind used by pirate bands who preyed on unarmed cargo haulers along the reach. Vicious, quick, and cowardly. They never attacked anything that could fight back. "They're going after it," Toru said, disbelief thick in his voice. "Ma'am, that thing shouldn't even be able to defend itself. Its hull configuration doesn't match any known weapons platform. It's not a warship." "Then the raiders are about to learn a very short lesson," Yasa said, though privately she agreed with him. From every angle they could measure, the strange ship looked like cargo. Slow turning, thick-bodied, no visible weapon batteries, perfect prey. The 2 raiders closed in and opened fire without warning, the way raiders always did. Yasa watched twin streams of plasma fire lance out toward the stranger's hull. And then something happened, that made every officer on the bridge go silent. The stranger did not dodge. It did not raise a shield that anyone could detect. The plasma bolt struck the hull directly, and the hull simply held. Sparks flew. A section of the outer plating glowed orange and then faded. But there was no breach, no explosion, no venting atmosphere. The ship kept moving forward as if nothing at all had happened. "That's not possible," Toru whispered. "No armor plate can absorb a direct hit like that without at least venting atmosphere. The heat alone should have." "I can see what it did, Toru," Yasa said, though her voice had lost some of its calm. "Tell me what it does next." What it did next was worse for the raiders. Two hard points on the stranger's hull, previously hidden or simply not registering on convergence sensors, rotated and opened fire. There was no charge-up sequence, no visible cooldown period, no careful energy management that Yasa's instruments had ever tracked in a warship. The weapons simply fired, again and again, faster than any turret the Convergence had ever built. The first raider took 3 hits in as many seconds and came apart in a burst of debris and freezing gas. The second tried to break off and run. It did not get far. The stranger's weapon tracked it, followed its evasive turn with a precision that should have required a targeting computer far more advanced than anything Yasa knew of, and put it down before it had traveled 2,000 kilometers. The bridge was silent for a long moment. "Ma'am," Toru said finally, "I have never seen anything move like that. I have never seen anything fire like that. And I have never, in 11 cycles of service, seen a hull survive a direct plasma hit without so much as a hull breach warning." Yasa did not answer right away. She was thinking about every law of engineering she had ever been taught: hull integrity limits, weapon cooldown cycles, acceleration curves that living crews could survive. This ship had broken every one of them in the space of 10 minutes, and it had done so while apparently doing nothing more dramatic than defending itself from a couple of low-grade pirates. "Hail them," she said at last. "Carefully. Standard first contact protocol. I want to know who flies a ship like that." It took several attempts before the channel opened. When it did, there was no immediate response, only a long silence filled with faint static, and, underneath it, what sounded like several voices talking quickly in the background, none of it in a language her translator could parse yet. Then a voice came through, tired-sounding but calm, speaking words that the translator struggled with for a few seconds before catching up. "This is the vessel you're hailing. We're not looking for trouble. Just passing through. Stand by while we patch your language into the system." "You are unregistered in Convergence territory," Yasa said, keeping her voice even despite her racing pulse. "You will identify your vessel and point of origin." There was a pause. Then, almost amused, the voice answered, "Yeah, we get that a lot out here. Give us a second." A new feed opened on the display. Not audio this time, but visual. A direct camera link from the stranger's hull. It showed the side of the ship up close for the first time, and Yasa finally saw clearly what the marking near the bow actually was. It was a flag. A rectangle divided by colors and a scattering of small white shapes in one corner, painted large enough to be seen from a long way off. The paint chipped and scorched in places, but still unmistakably deliberate. Beneath it, stenciled in blocky letters that her translator rendered a moment later, were the words, "Terran Vessel Prometheus." "Terran," Yasa repeated slowly. She searched her memory and found nothing. No species by that name appeared in any convergence record she had ever studied, and she had studied a great many, since First Contact Protocol was part of her basic training. "You've never heard of us?" the voice on the other end said, not a question. "Figured as much. We're new out here. Name's Captain Marcus Reyes, Terran Republic vessel Prometheus, out of Sol System. We're not hostile. We're not looking for a fight, and we'd appreciate it if you didn't shoot at us either, seeing as we just had a long day." Yasa looked at the wreckage of the 2 raiders still drifting and burning on her display, then back at the calm, almost weary tone of the voice. "Your vessel just destroyed 2 armed raiders in under a minute," she said, "without visible shielding, without a cooldown period on your weapons. Your hull absorbed a direct plasma strike without breaching. By every law of physics we understand, your ship should not exist in its current form." There was a short pause, and then a small, tired laugh came through the channel. "Yeah," Captain Reyes said. We get that a lot too. Yasa ordered the whisper current to hold position and requested permission to send a formal escort request, following protocol exactly as she had been trained. Inside, however, her mind was no longer following any protocol at all. She kept staring at the hull plating that had shrugged off a direct hit, at the twin cannons that had fired with no visible charge cycle, at the crude, blunt shape of a ship that looked like it had been built by someone who did not care about elegance, only about surviving. "Ma'am," Toru said quietly, watching the same footage loop for the fourth time. "What do we tell the council?" Yasa thought about it for a long moment before answering. "We tell them the truth," she said, "that we found a ship that breaks every rule we know, flown by a species we've never heard of, and that it just killed 2 armed raiders without breaking a sweat. And then we tell them, we need people smarter than us to come explain how, because I certainly can't." The Prometheus held its position, patient and scarred and utterly still against the stars, its engines still leaking that strange excess of power the sensors could not explain, its flag catching the distant starlight as if daring anyone else to come and test it. Yasa watched it a moment longer, and for the first time in 11 quiet cycles of service, she felt something she was not used to feeling on a routine patrol. She felt afraid, not of the ship's weapons, though those were frightening enough. She was afraid of what it meant that a species she had never heard of could build something like this, could fly it into a war zone alone, and could speak about surviving an attack the way most people spoke about a delayed shuttle. She began recording her official report, choosing her words with great care, knowing that whatever she wrote next would likely be read by every serious mind in the Convergence within a matter of days. "Contact designation: Terran vessel Prometheus," she began. "Origin: unknown system Sol. Species: unknown. Self-identified as human. Recommend immediate diplomatic and scientific follow-up. Warning: vessel demonstrates capabilities inconsistent with known physical limitations. Recommend extreme caution." She paused before the final line, glancing once more at the image still frozen on her screen, the flag bright even through the scorch marks and the old battle scars. "Recommend," she added slowly, "that we find out everything we can about this species called Terrans, before someone with less patience than a pirate decides to test them." Far ahead, unaware or unconcerned by the debate it had just started 3 systems away, the Prometheus continued on its course, engines glowing faintly with power that should not have existed, carrying its flag and its crew deeper into space that had, until this day, belonged entirely to someone else's rules. By every law of physics, they said that ship was impossible, until they saw the Terran flag. Yasa Vel's report reached the Convergence Council faster than any patrol report she had ever filed. Usually her messages sat in a queue for days before anyone with real authority read them. This time a reply came back within 6 hours, and it did not come from a mid-level administrator. It came from Fleet Marshal Orenthal Cade himself, a name Yasa had only ever seen printed at the bottom of official orders. The message was short: hold position, do not engage. A research and diplomatic fleet is being assembled. You will act as liaison upon their arrival. 3 days later, the Kestrel Reach, normally the quietest patch of space in the sector, was full of ships. A Convergence cruiser, called the Patient Word, arrived first, carrying Fleet Marshal Cade himself, along with a team of scientists, translators, and 2 full companies of Marines, just in case. Behind it came smaller support vessels, sensor platforms, and a ship that Yasa had only ever heard about in training lectures. A Zanari research vessel, crewed by one of the oldest and most careful scientific species in the Convergence. Captain Marcus Reyes and the Prometheus had not moved from where they had first been found. When Yasa asked him why, over the comm channel that had slowly become almost friendly over the last 3 days, he had simply said, "We were curious to see who'd show up. Also, we needed the repair time. That last fight banged us up more than it looked." Fleet Marshal Cade wanted to meet the human captain in person before anything else happened, and so a shuttle was arranged. A small neutral meeting aboard a supply platform halfway between the 2 fleets. Yasa was ordered to attend as the officer who had made first contact. She did not know if that was an honor or a punishment. The meeting room aboard the platform was small, round, built for exactly this kind of delicate first exchange. When the human delegation arrived, there were only 3 of them: Captain Reyes, A broad-shouldered man with tired eyes and a scar along one side of his jaw, a younger woman he introduced as his engineer, Lieutenant Priya Anand, and a translator drone that hovered quietly at his shoulder, clearly built from spare parts rather than bought new. Fleet Marshal Cade, tall and pale-scaled, with the slow, careful movements of his species, greeted them with the formal convergence welcome, palms open, head slightly bowed. Reyes copied the gesture a beat too late, but with obvious sincerity, which seemed to please Cade more than a perfect copy would have. "On behalf of the convergence of peoples," Cade said, "I welcome you, and I apologize for the caution with which we approached your vessel. Our sensors reported readings that our science says should not be possible. We hope you understand our hesitation." Reyes gave a short, tired laugh. "Trust me, Marshal, you're not the first people to look at one of our ships and say that. Probably won't be the last either." "Then this has happened before?" "More times than I can count," Reyes said. "Every species we've met so far has had the same reaction. Shock, then suspicion, then about 100 questions from your scientists. No offense, but it gets a little repetitive." Cade's expression, as much as Yasa could read on a face so different from her own, seemed to sharpen with interest rather than offense. "Then perhaps you would humor us with 101 questions. We have brought people whose entire purpose is understanding what should not be understood." That was how, over the following 2 weeks, the joint fleet at Kestrel Reach became something between a diplomatic summit and a very cautious science experiment. The Zanari researchers, led by an elderly scientist named Dr. Fesh, were allowed aboard the Prometheus for a full inspection, accompanied by Lieutenant Anand, who seemed to enjoy showing off her ship almost as much as she enjoyed watching the Zanari's reactions. What they found unsettled every principle of engineering the Convergence held dear. The hull, they learned, was not made of some exotic supermaterial as many had guessed. It was, according to Anand, just steel and composite, but a lot more of it than anyone with sense would use. Convergence ship design followed a strict rule of mass efficiency. Every gram of material had to justify its presence, since more mass meant more fuel needed to move it. Terran ship design, it seemed, followed almost the opposite rule. Build it thick, build it redundant. If one system fails, have 3 backups, and if all 3 fail, have a 4th built from spare parts by the crew themselves. "You built backups for your backups?" Dr. Fesh asked, staring at a maintenance panel that revealed no less than 5 separate wiring paths for a single sensor array. "We built backups for the backups," Anand said cheerfully. "Space doesn't care how clever your design was. If a rock the size of your thumb takes out your only power conduit, we'd rather carry the extra weight." "But the fuel cost is higher." "Yeah, we compensate with a bigger engine and a rougher ride. Nobody said it was elegant, it just works." The weapons were, if anything, more troubling to Convergence military doctrine than the armor. Convergence energy weapons required careful charge cycles to avoid overheating and damaging the weapon itself, a system perfected over centuries to maximize the lifespan of expensive equipment. When the human weapons officer, a quiet young man named Corporal Diallo, was asked about the Prometheus's rapid-fire cannons, he simply shrugged. "They overheat, sure. We just built them to overheat slower than the enemy can shoot back, and we carry spares for when they do burn out. Cheaper to replace a cannon than to lose the fight, because you were too worried about breaking your gun." "You accept your own weapons will be destroyed by use?" Fleet Marshal Cade asked, when the report reached him. "They accept losses across the board," Yasa said, reading from her own notes during the debrief. "Ships, weapons, even crew. Their doctrine seems built around the idea that anything can be replaced except the mission. It's not recklessness exactly. It's more like they've simply decided that hesitation costs more lives than mistakes do." Cade was quiet for a long moment after that. "That is a very expensive way to fight a war," he said finally. "Perhaps," Yasa said. "But Marshal, their hull survived a direct plasma hit with no shields raised. Their weapons fired faster than our sensors could track. Whatever the cost, it seems to work." The deeper they looked, the stranger the picture became. Dr. Fesh's team found evidence in the ship's logs, translated slowly and carefully by the combined efforts of both crews, that the Terran Republic was barely 200 years old as a unified system-wide government. Before that, The species had been divided into dozens of competing nations on a single homeworld, fighting wars, building weapons, nearly destroying themselves more than once, with conflicts that Fesh's translation software rendered with words like World War and, more troublingly, near extinction event. They almost wiped themselves out, Fesh reported to the council in a private briefing that Yasa was allowed to attend, multiple times according to their own historical records. And yet here they are, expanding into space faster than any species we have first contacted in the last 3 centuries, with technology that, while crude by our standards in some areas, exceeds our capabilities in raw performance by significant margins. "How is that possible?" asked one of the council members, a stern Voru elder named Chask. "A species that nearly destroyed itself should be cautious, careful, slow to expand, not this." Dr. Fesh considered the question for a long moment. "I believe," she said slowly, "that they are cautious in a way we do not recognize as caution. They do not avoid danger. They prepare for it, expect it, and build machines and plans that assume disaster is coming regardless of what they do. Where we ask, how do we avoid this failure, they seem to ask, when this fails, what happens next, and how fast can we fix it?" "That sounds like a species built for war," Chask said darkly. "Perhaps," Fesh agreed, "or perhaps it is a species built to survive, by any means necessary, war being only one of the many disasters they have learned to expect." Yasa, listening from the back of the room, found herself thinking of the calm, tired voice of Captain Reyes over the comm channel on that first day. "We're not looking for trouble, just passing through." It had not sounded like the voice of a conqueror. It had sounded like the voice of someone who had simply gotten very used to trouble finding him anyway, and had stopped being surprised by it. Over the following days, as the scientific reports piled up and the council debated behind closed doors what to do about this new and unsettling species, Yasa found herself spending more time aboard the Prometheus than her orders strictly required. She told herself it was to maintain the liaison relationship. In truth, she had simply become curious, in a way she had not felt since she was very young, and had first decided to join the fleet. She sat with Lieutenant Anand in the ship's cramped mess hall one evening, watching human crew members eat and joke and argue about something on a data screen that seemed to be a sporting match from their homeworld, recorded who knew how many years ago, and replayed for comfort more than entertainment. "Can I ask you something?" Yasa said. "Your captain said this reaction, the shock, the disbelief, happens every time you meet someone new. Doesn't that bother you? Being seen as impossible, as something to be afraid of?" Anand thought about it while chewing a mouthful of something that smelled sharp and unfamiliar. "A little at first," she admitted. "But you get used to it. We didn't build ships like this to scare anyone. We built them because our engineers grew up in a world where things break, plans fail, and help doesn't always come in time. So we build for the worst day, every day. It's not that we don't respect danger. We respect it so much we plan for it to actually happen, instead of hoping it won't. And if it does happen, if the worst day comes..." Anand smiled, though there was something tired behind it, the same tiredness Yasa had heard in the captain's voice days before. "Then we're still standing when it's over. That's really all the secret is. Nothing fancy, just stubbornness, wrapped in enough steel to survive being stubborn." Yasa looked around the mess hall at the scarred, mismatched crew of the Prometheus, laughing at their old recorded game, eating strange food, living inside a ship that broke every rule the Convergence held sacred, and she began to understand, slowly, that the true danger of this new species was not their weapons or their armor. It was that they simply refused to stop, no matter what the laws of physics, or history, or common sense told them should have stopped them long ago. 3 days after that conversation, the Council reached its decision. Diplomatic relations with the Terran Republic would be formally opened, a permanent observation and liaison post would be established, and Fleet Marshal Cade, in a move that surprised everyone including Yasa, requested that Sub-Commander Yasa Vel be assigned as senior liaison officer for all future contact. "You found them," Cade told her simply, when she asked why. "You will help us understand them, and if I am right about what is coming, Sub-Commander, we are going to need to understand them very quickly indeed." Yasa did not yet know what he meant by that. She would find out soon enough. when the true danger the Convergence had been quietly hiding from for decades finally crossed into Kestrel reach, and every carefully built rule of Convergence warfare proved nowhere near enough to stop it. By every law of physics, they said that ship was impossible, until they saw the Terran flag. 6 weeks after the first contact at Kestrel Reach, Yassavel had a new title, a new posting aboard a joint liaison station called Meeting Point, and a growing list of things about humans that still did not make sense to her. She had learned that they slept in shifts shorter than most species considered healthy, that they argued loudly and often without meaning any harm by it, and that they had a strange habit of naming their most dangerous machines after old stories and gods, as if daring the universe to notice. She had also learned slowly to like them, not all of them, but enough. It was during a routine supply exchange, humans trading strange preserved foods for Convergence medical technology, that the alarms went off. The alert did not come from Meeting Point's own sensors. It came from a relay buoy stationed at the very edge of Convergence space, a warning system installed decades ago and never once triggered in Yassa's lifetime. When it activated, every officer on the station went pale, human and Convergence alike, though for very different reasons. "What is it?" Captain Reyes asked, standing beside Yassa on the station's observation deck as the alert klaxons repeated their slow, grim pattern. "The Scarn Dominion," Yassa said quietly. "A power on the far side of Convergence space. We do not fight them. We do not trade with them. We simply try to stay far enough away that they forget we exist. That's not much of a plan." "It has worked for 80 years, Yassa said, "until now, apparently." The reports that followed over the next several hours painted a grim picture. A Scarn raiding fleet, far larger than anything the small border patrols in this sector could handle, had crossed into contested space and was moving directly toward the mining colony of Fahren's Hollow, a settlement of nearly 40,000 Convergent civilians, along with a small but growing number of human traders and workers who had begun settling there since diplomatic relations opened. 40,000 people, Reyes said, reading the report over Yassa's shoulder. "And what's the Convergence response?" Yassa hesitated before answering. "Standard doctrine calls for a defensive fleet, 3 times the size of the attacking force before engaging. We do not have that. Fleet Marshal Cade has requested reinforcements from the core systems, but they are 11 days away at best speed." "And the Scarn fleet?" 30 hours from Fahren's Hollow." Reyes was quiet for a moment, his jaw tightening in a way Yassa had learned meant he was doing math he did not like the answer to. "So the choice is, abandon the colony, or fight a battle you know you'll lose." "That is the Convergence position, yes," Yassa admitted. "Our doctrine does not permit engagements with unfavorable odds. Too many lives lost for too little chance of victory. It is considered irresponsible." "Huh," Reyes said. "Funny. Back home, we call that Tuesday." He turned and walked off the observation deck without another word, already tapping at a communicator, calling for his crew. Yassa followed, a strange mix of alarm and something close to hope rising in her chest. By the time she caught up with him in the Prometheus's cramped command bay, Reyes already had 3 other human ships on the comm channel, small independent traders, and a single armed escort vessel that had been in the system for supply runs. None of them belonged to any official Terran military force. They were simply, as far as Yassa understood it, people who happened to own ships. "Here's the deal," Reyes was saying, his voice calm but firm. "Convergence colony's about to get hit by something too big for the locals to handle alone. 40,000 people, including some of our own folks living out there. I'm not ordering anybody to come. This isn't official business, and it's not going to be an easy fight. But I'm going, and I could use the company." There was a short pause, filled with static, before the first reply came through, a rough female voice from one of the trading vessels. "You had me at 40,000 people, Reyes. Count the Iron Wren in." The others agreed in short order, one after another, until Reyes had assembled a scrappy little fleet of 5 ships, none of them warships in any formal sense, against an enemy force that, according to the Convergence reports, numbered over 30. Yassa stared at the numbers on the display, then at Reyes, unable to keep the disbelief from her voice. "Captain, this is not a battle. This is a massacre. 5 ships against 30. Even with your unusual capabilities, the odds are bad. Yeah, I know, Reyes said, not looking up from his console. But here's the thing about odds, Yasa. They're a guess about what happens if nothing unexpected occurs. We've built our whole philosophy around making sure something unexpected always occurs. That's kind of our specialty. You could die, Yasa said. All of you. Reyes finally looked up at her, and for a moment, the tiredness in his eyes was replaced by something harder, older. 40,000 people are going to die if somebody doesn't try, he said. We've buried enough of our own throughout our history standing by and waiting for someone else to have better odds first. Doesn't sit right with us anymore. Never really did. Fleet Marshal Cade, when informed of the human plan, argued fiercely against it, calling it reckless, hopeless, a waste of good people over doctrine that made no strategic sense. But he could not order the humans to stand down, since they were not, technically, under Convergence command. And in the end, watching the reports of the approaching Scarn fleet grow closer by the hour, he made a decision of his own that surprised the entire station. If they are foolish enough to go, he said, then I will not let them go alone. He committed everything the Convergence had in the sector, the cruiser Patient Word, 4 smaller escort ships, and Meeting Point's own limited defense platforms, a force still badly outnumbered by the Scarn fleet, but no longer quite so hopeless when combined with the strange, stubborn energy of 5 human ships that refused to calculate the odds before deciding to fight anyway. Yasa requested and was granted a place aboard the Prometheus for the coming battle. She told herself it was for observation purposes, to record human tactics firsthand for future reports. She did not fully believe her own explanation, and judging by the knowing look Lieutenant Anand gave her when she boarded, neither did anyone else. The combined fleet arrived at Fahren's Hollow 4 hours before the Scarn raiders, just enough time to organize a defense. Yasa watched from the Prometheus's bridge as Captain Reyes laid out a plan that made every Convergence tactical officer on the comm channel go quiet, with a mixture of horror and reluctant fascination. Convergence doctrine called for defensive formations, layered shields, careful energy conservation, a slow, grinding battle of attrition designed to preserve as many ships as possible. Reyes's plan called for something else entirely. We're not going to outshoot 30 ships with 5, he explained, sharing a rough sketch on the shared display, all straight lines and blunt arrows that looked almost childish, next to the Convergence fleet's elegant tactical diagrams. So we're not going to try. We're going to hit them where it hurts before they even know we're serious, then fall back and let the colony's defense platforms and the Convergence fleet finish grinding them down while they're still confused. Hit them how? Cade's voice came through the channel, tight with tension. Their command ship, Reyes said. Every fleet's got one, even raiders. Knock out the head, the body panics. My ships are faster and hit harder per ton than anything you've got, Marshal. No offense. We go in fast, go in ugly, take out their command structure, and get out before they can organize a real response. You hold the line at the colony and clean up whatever's left once they're leaderless and scared. That plan relies on your 5 ships surviving a direct run at the heart of an enemy fleet, Cade said. The casualty rate alone will probably be bad, Reyes finished for him. Yeah, we know, we're doing it anyway. Yasa, standing quietly at the back of the bridge, watched the Convergence officers on the comm channel exchange looks of pure disbelief, the same look she imagined she must have worn herself, weeks ago, staring at sensor readings that broke every law she had ever trusted. Fleet Marshal Cade was silent for a long moment before finally speaking again, his voice heavier than before. Very well, Captain Reyes. We will hold the line at the colony, as you ask, and may whatever gods your people still believe in watch over you, because I suspect our doctrine alone will not be enough to save you if this goes wrong. Wouldn't be the first time it went wrong, Marshal, Reyes said, already turning to his crew, already moving. It's what we do after it goes wrong that matters. Prometheus, prep for combat. Anand, I want everything we've got ready to burn in 15 minutes. Diallo, wake up every gun on this ship, even the ones we're not supposed to still be using. The bridge became a storm of quiet, controlled motion, crew members moving to stations with the ease of people who had done this many times before, who expected disaster and had simply decided, long ago, to meet it head-on, rather than wait for it to arrive on its own terms. Yasa found herself gripping the edge of a console, watching the Scarn fleet's projected arrival time tick steadily downward on the main display, and felt, for the first time in her career, a strange and unfamiliar kind of certainty settle over her fear. Whatever happened in the next few hours, she understood now, would not be decided by the careful rules of convergence doctrine, the rules she had trusted her entire life. It would be decided by 5 battered human ships, and a philosophy that seemed to boil down to one simple, terrifying idea, that the odds were only ever a guess, and guesses could be beaten by people who refused, on principle, to accept them. The Scarn fleet crossed into system range 20 minutes later, 30 warships strong, moving with the slow, confident arrogance of a force that had never once been seriously challenged in this sector. They had no idea what was waiting for them. By every law of physics, they said that ship was impossible, until they saw the Terran flag. The Scarn fleet moved into the system in a wide, confident formation. 30 raider warships spread across the black in a pattern built for one purpose: to overwhelm anything foolish enough to stand in their way. Their command ship sat near the rear of the formation, a heavy cruiser bristling with weapons and shielded by a screen of smaller escorts, exactly where convergence doctrine said a command ship should sit: safe, protected, untouchable. Nobody had told the Scarn about human doctrine. Aboard the Prometheus, Captain Marcus Reyes watched the enemy formation settle into place on the tactical display and allowed himself a small, grim smile. Predictable, he muttered. Good. Predictable is easy to hurt. Yasa Vel stood near the back of the bridge, gripping a support rail hard enough that her knuckles had gone pale beneath her gray-blue skin. Around her, the human crew moved with a strange, quiet focus that reminded her less of soldiers preparing for battle and more of laborers preparing for a long, hard shift of dangerous work. There was no shouting, no visible fear, only a steady, practiced rhythm of checks and confirmations. "Anon status," Reyes said. "Engines are hot and ugly, just how we like them." Lieutenant Anon called back from her station. "We're running the reactor 11% over rated safety limits. Should hold together long enough." "Should?" Yasa asked, unable to stop herself. "Should is the best guarantee you get out here, Sub-Commander," Anon said without looking up. 90% of engineering is knowing exactly how far past the rules you can push something before it actually breaks. The other 10% is being ready to fix it fast when you guess wrong. The 4 other human ships, small independent traders never designed for war, formed up loosely around the Prometheus, their formation ragged and uneven, compared to the precise geometric spacing of the convergence fleet, holding position back near Fahren's hollow. To Yasa's trained eye, it looked disorganized, almost careless. Reyes seemed to read the doubt on her face. "It's not as messy as it looks," he said. "Tight formations are great, until one shot scatters shrapnel across half your fleet. We spread out on purpose. Makes us harder to hit all at once, and it means if one of us gets unlucky, it doesn't take the others down too. And if you're wrong about their weapons range, then we find out the hard way. Same as always." He turned to the crew. "All ships. This is Prometheus Actual. We go in fast, straight for their command ship. Ignore the escorts unless they're directly in our path. We are not here to win a fair fight. We are here to end this one before it really starts. Punch through, hit hard, get out. On my mark." The 5 human ships surged forward, accelerating at a rate that made Yasa's stomach lurch even through the ship's internal dampeners, numbers climbing on the display that, by every rule she had ever studied, should have been impossible for living crew to survive. She gripped the rail tighter and forced herself to keep watching. The Scarn fleet reacted slowly at first, their sensors clearly struggling to process what they were seeing. 5 small, unfamiliar ships breaking from the defensive formation and driving straight into the heart of a fleet 6 times their size. By the time their formation began to shift, adjusting escorts to intercept, the human ships were already dangerously close. "They're moving fighters to intercept," Toru's voice came through from the Convergence command channel, relayed from the patient word. 12 small craft, converging on your position." "Copy that," Reyes said, entirely too calm for what he had just been told. "Diallo, clear us a path." Corporal Diallo, hunched over the weapons console with the focused stillness of a man who had done this more times than he cared to count, brought the Prometheus's main batteries online. The rapid-fire cannons Yasa had first seen tear apart two pirate raiders at Kestrel Reach opened up again, this time against a much larger target. There was no careful charge cycle, no measured burst fire. The guns simply roared, continuous streams of fire chewing through the incoming fighter screen, with a violence that made even the convergence officers watching from a distance go silent on the comm channel. 3 fighters vanished in the first 2 seconds. 5 more scattered, breaking formation entirely rather than face that wall of fire. The remaining 4 pressed on, weapons flaring, and several shots struck the Prometheus's hull directly. The ship shuddered. Alarms chimed briefly on a side console before Anand silenced them with a sharp tap. "Hull integrity?" Reyes asked. "Down to 94%, Anand reported. "We'll live." Yasa stared at the number, waiting for the panic she expected to see on the crew's faces, and found none. 94% hull integrity, after multiple direct hits, was treated not as a crisis, but as a mildly annoying inconvenience. The kind of thing you mentioned in passing and then moved on from. The 4 human ships behind the Prometheus were faring less well. The trading vessel Iron Wren took a hard hit across its forward section, venting a bright plume of atmosphere before its crew sealed the breach, the ship shuddering visibly on the display but continuing forward regardless, weapons still firing. "Wren, report," Reyes called. "We're still flying, Captain," came the rough female voice from earlier, tighter now, strained with pain or effort or both. "Lost pressure in the forward cargo bay. Nothing we can't live without for now. Still on your wing." "Copy that. Keep pushing." They broke through the fighter screen with all 5 ships still moving, still fighting, and the Scarn command cruiser finally came into direct sensor range, its escorts scrambling to form a defensive wall between the approaching human ships and their heavily armored commander. "That's the one," Reyes said. "All business now." No trace of the tired weariness Yasa had grown used to hearing in his voice. "All ships, target the command cruiser directly. Ignore the escorts. We are not slowing down for them." What followed was, in Yasa's later report to the Council, the single most reckless and effective piece of combat she had ever witnessed in her entire career. The 5 human ships did not attempt to fight the escort screen head-on. Instead, they simply drove through the gaps between the larger, slower Scarn escort vessels, weapons firing continuously, hulls taking hit after hit that convergence engineering would have deemed catastrophic, absorbing damage that any convergence captain would have retreated from 3 separate times over. The Prometheus took the worst of it, positioned at the front of the human formation, its hull scoring from repeated impacts, its shields, such as they were, flickering and failing entirely under the sustained fire. And still it did not slow down. "Hull at 71%, Anand called out, her voice tight now but still controlled. "We're taking real damage, Captain." "How long until we're in range of their command ship?" 40 seconds. "Then we've got 40 seconds of taking hits left to do," Reyes said. "Hold together, Promi, just a little further." Yasa watched the tactical display in a kind of frozen horror as the Prometheus pushed deeper into the heart of the enemy formation, past the point where every instinct trained into her by a lifetime of convergence doctrine screamed that retreat was the only sane option remaining. And yet the ship held, battered, scorched, bleeding atmosphere from at least 2 small hull breaches that Anand's team was scrambling to patch even as the battle raged, but it held. When the Prometheus finally came into weapons range of the Scarn command cruiser, Diallo did not hesitate. Every weapon the ship still had operational opened fire simultaneously, concentrated on a single point along the cruiser's flank that Anand had identified, in the brief chaos of the approach, as a likely reactor access point based on the thermal signature bleeding through the hull. The cruiser's shields, designed to withstand sustained bombardment from an entire fleet over time, buckled under the sheer concentrated violence of the human assault, far faster than any Scarn engineer had ever planned for. A section of the hull glowed white, then split, venting a massive plume of superheated gas and debris into space. The Scarn command cruiser did not explode outright, but its engines flickered and died, its weapons batteries fell silent one by one, and across the entire Scarn fleet, ship after ship began to break formation, some retreating outright, others simply drifting, leaderless and confused, exactly as Reyes had predicted. "Command ship is disabled," Diallo reported, something like disbelief creeping into his exhausted voice. "Multiple secondary explosions. They're not fighting back anymore, Captain. They're running." On the comm channel, Fleet Marshal Cade's voice came through, tight with something Yasa had never heard from him before, genuine astonishment. "Captain Reyes, the Scarn fleet is breaking apart. Our forces are moving to engage the stragglers now. I do not have words for what I just witnessed." Reyes leaned back in his chair for the first time since the battle began, exhaling a long, tired breath. "Don't need words, Marshal. Just need your ships to mop up while mine limp home for repairs. We're running on fumes over here." Yasa finally let go of the support rail she had been gripping since the fighting began, her hand aching from the pressure, and looked around the bridge at the exhausted, battered, victorious human crew. Nobody was cheering. Nobody was celebrating loudly. They simply began the slow, methodical work of assessing damage, patching hulls, checking on the injured, treating a victory against impossible odds with the same steady, practiced calm they had shown before the battle even started. "You did it," Yasa said quietly, almost to herself. "You actually did it." Reyes glanced back at her, and for the first time since she had met him, the tiredness in his eyes was mixed with something that looked almost like relief. "Told you," he said. "Odds are just a guess. Doesn't mean you have to accept the answer." Behind them, on the main display, the remains of the Scarn fleet scattered into full retreat, chased by a convergence fleet that, for the first time in 80 years, had actually won a fight it was not supposed to be able to win, carried there on the strength of 5 battered ships and a flag that had, until 6 weeks ago, meant absolutely nothing to anyone in this part of the galaxy. It would not stay that way for long. By every law of physics, they said that ship was impossible, until they saw the Terran flag. The Battle of Fahren's Hollow, as it came to be known across convergent space, should not have been survivable, let alone winnable. Every analyst who studied the sensor logs in the weeks that followed came to the same conclusion. By the accepted rules of engagement, by the doctrine every convergence officer had trained under for generations, the defense of the colony should have failed. 40,000 civilians should have been lost, or at best, evacuated in a desperate scramble, while the Scarn Dominion claimed another mining world for its own. Instead, 5 human ships, none of them true warships, had shattered the head of a fleet 6 times their size, and a convergence force that had never expected to win had finished the job. Fahren's Hollow stood. 40,000 people who should have died were, instead, sending messages of gratitude to a small battered ship called the Prometheus, whose crew still did not fully understand why anyone was making such a fuss. "We just did what needed doing," Captain Reyes told Fleet Marshal Cade during the formal debrief held aboard the Patient Word 2 days after the battle. "Wasn't anything special about it." Cade studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable to Yasa's eyes, though she had learned to read the small shifts in his posture that usually meant deep thought. "Captain Reyes," he said finally, "you and 4 unarmed trading vessels destroyed the command structure of a fleet that has terrorized this border for 80 years. A fleet my own doctrine has always told me we could never safely challenge. You call that nothing special." "I call it Tuesday, Marshal," Reyes said, echoing the words he had said to Yasa weeks before, though this time there was a tired smile behind them instead of grim resolve. "We've been doing this kind of thing since before we ever left our own solar system. Not because we wanted to, because sometimes the safe choice gets people killed just as fast as the risky one, and at least the risky one gives you a chance." Cade was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a weight Yasa had never heard from him before. "The Council has been debating for 6 weeks how to classify your species. Ally, curiosity, potential threat. There were some, I will admit, who argued you were too unpredictable to trust, too willing to break rules that have kept the peace in this region for centuries." "And now?" Reyes asked. "Now," Cade said, "I intend to tell them that the rules that have kept the peace in this region for centuries were not enough to save Fahren's Hollow, that it took a species willing to ignore those rules, to throw away careful odds and cautious doctrine, to do what all our careful planning could not. I intend to recommend that the Terran Republic be offered a formal seat among the convergence of peoples, Not as a curiosity to be studied, but as an ally to be trusted. Reyes blinked, clearly not expecting that answer. For a moment, the tiredness that seemed to live permanently behind his eyes lifted, just slightly. That's a bigger step than I expected, Marshal. You are a bigger discovery than I expected, Captain, Cade said. When Subcommander Vell first reported a ship that broke every law of physics we understood, I believed it was an error, a sensor malfunction, perhaps an enemy weapon we had never encountered before. I did not believe, not truly, that an entire species could simply choose to build things that should not work, and make them work anyway, through nothing more than persistence and an unwillingness to accept failure as final. We didn't have much choice, Reyes said quietly. Our homeworld nearly ended more than once, Marshal. Wars, disease, disasters we brought on ourselves before we knew better. We learned the hard way that waiting for the perfect solution gets people killed while you wait. So we stopped waiting. We started building things that were good enough, right now, and then we built the next version better once the first one taught us what we got wrong. Yasa, standing quietly at the edge of the room as she had throughout most of the debrief, found herself thinking of Dr. Fesch's words from weeks ago. They are cautious in a way we do not recognize as caution. She understood it now, in a way that mere reports and sensor readings could never have taught her. Humans were not reckless. They were simply willing to fail faster and more often than any other species she had ever known, trusting that each failure taught them something worth more than the safety of never trying at all. The formal offer of Convergence membership was extended to the Terran Republic 3 months later, delivered not by a distant committee, but by Fleet Marshal Cade himself, traveling personally to the edge of human space to make the offer face-to-face, a gesture that human diplomats later told Yasa had meant more to their government than any written treaty ever could have. The Terran Republic accepted, though not without its own long, loud, chaotic debate that Yasa observed with equal parts confusion and fascination, humans arguing publicly and passionately about every clause of the agreement in a way no convergent species would ever have permitted in formal proceedings. In the end, though, the answer was yes, delivered with the same stubborn, hopeful energy Yasa had come to associate with everything human. Meeting Point, the small liaison station where it had all truly begun, was rebuilt and expanded over the following year into something new. The first joint Convergence Terran shipyard and research station in the sector, a place where Zanari engineers who valued elegance and efficiency worked side by side with human engineers who valued redundancy and brute survivability, each slowly, grudgingly, learning something valuable from the other. Yasa remained assigned there, her role expanding from simple liaison officer to something closer to a bridge between two very different ways of understanding the universe. She spent long hours with Lieutenant Anand, now a good friend rather than merely a curious study, learning the strange, stubborn logic behind human engineering, and in turn teaching Anand some of the careful, patient precision that convergent science had spent centuries perfecting. You know, Anand said one evening, the two of them sharing a meal in the station's newly built common area, human and convergence food, finally sitting comfortably side by side on the same table. When we first met you, half my crew thought you were going to arrest us, or worse. Half my crew thought your ship was some kind of weapon we hadn't catalogued yet, Yasa admitted. A doomsday device, maybe, sent to test our defenses. And now look at us. Anand gestured around the busy common area, filled with the mixed sounds of two very different species learning, slowly and imperfectly, to live and work together. Funny how that works out. Captain Reyes, promoted within the newly formalized Terran fleet, but still insisting on personally captaining the Prometheus whenever official duties allowed, visited the station often over the following years. He and Yasa developed an easy friendship built on mutual respect, and no small amount of good-natured argument over whose approach to engineering made more sense, an argument neither of them ever fully won, nor particularly wanted to. You ever think about it? He asked her once, standing on the station's observation deck, watching a joint Convergence Terran patrol depart on routine border duty. Human ships flying wing to wing with Convergence cruisers, in a formation that would have seemed impossible only a few years before. How close this all came to going the other way. If Fahren's Hollow had fallen, if we'd been just a little too late, a little too outnumbered. I think about it, Yasa admitted, more often than I would like. Yeah, Reyes said quietly. Me too. They stood together in silence for a while, watching the ships depart, the Terran flag painted proudly on their hulls no longer strange or frightening to Convergence eyes, but familiar now. Welcome, a symbol that had come, in a short span of years, to mean something new across this quiet corner of the galaxy. That the impossible was not always a threat to be feared, but sometimes simply a solution nobody else had been brave enough, or stubborn enough, to try. For what it's worth, Yasa said finally, I am glad it went the way it did. I am glad Subcommander Vell filed that report 6 years ago, instead of dismissing it as a censor error and moving on to the next quiet patrol. Reyes smiled, the tired lines around his eyes softening into something closer to genuine warmth. For what it's worth, Yasa, so am I. Behind them, the joint fleet moved out into the dark, carrying 2 very different flags side by side, proof that the old rules, the careful doctrines, the cautious limits everyone had once believed unbreakable, could sometimes be rewritten, not through some grand new law of physics, but through nothing more complicated than the stubborn refusal of a small and scarred and impossible ship, and the flag it carried, to ever stop trying. And across the growing edges of convergent space, in ports and stations and colonies that had once known nothing at all about a small blue world called Earth, a new saying had quietly begun to spread among the many species who now called the Terran Republic their ally. When the numbers said it could not be done, when the odds were too heavy and the danger too great, people had begun to say simply, send for the humans. They have never once cared what the numbers said.